Thank you very much. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
How the body reacts to electromagnetic frequencies is what I'm going to be talking about today. And here's an outline of my presentation. I'm going to start with a paradigm shift in the way that we view healthcare in North America. I'm going to talk about sources of electromagnetic frequencies, both fields and radiation, and both natural and artificial. I'm going to talk about both the harmful effects of electromagnetic fields and the beneficial effects. And I'm going to discuss why not everyone responds to these frequencies the same way, things that you can do to promote your health, and actions required at various levels of society. Somehow it's not, there we go. So in this presentation, one of the key points I'd like to make is that we're going through a paradigm shift in healthcare. We tend to view the body primarily from a chemical perspective, and I think we have to focus slightly more on the physical perspective, the physics, and particularly within physics, electromagnetic frequencies. In 2011, I attended a medical meeting with some absolutely outstanding doctors. And one elderly physician got up and he said that when he has a patient, he asks them three essential questions. One is, are they getting all the essential nutrients that their body requires? And of course, if they're not, he supplements them. The second question is, are they exposed to toxic substances that need to be removed from either their environment or from their body? And so far, this is quite common. I think any doctor that you would talk to would come up with these two. But it was the third point that he made, and this was back in 2011, that caught me by surprise. And he said, are cells communicating with each other? And it seemed slightly an odd thing to say, but it's obvious that if you have a system, any kind of system, the components of that system have to be communicating with each other in order for that system to work. And here he was talking about cells communicating with each other using primarily things like hormones and neurotransmitters. And this is our chemical model of healthcare today. However, we have trillions of cells in our body, and they need to be communicating instantaneously. This simply cannot be done by chemicals alone. And it was Dr. Ross 80 who said that cells are whispering to each other electromagnetically. And so this is an interesting novel concept. I say novel, but it's more than 50 years old. So it's something that's novel to the medical community. And Dr. Fritz Popp had done research on things like biophotons and how they're used by the body to communicate. And so using these two different areas of research, I'm going to continue my lecture and go from a chemical model and convert this to an electromagnetic or a frequency model. And using the same types of questions, question number one would be, are we getting the essential frequencies that our body requires? And initially, this sounds like a very odd question, but the more you realize that we require electromagnetic frequencies from our surroundings, that you recognize that this is actually a very critical question to ask. Are we exposed to toxic frequencies, which has been my area of research for the past 30 years? And are the cells communicating with each other using electromagnetic frequencies and biophotons and whatever frequency mechanisms they use for that cell-to-cell communication? And if anything interferes with cellular communication, it interferes with the health of the entire system. Now, the concept of a paradigm shift in healthcare comes from a book written by Dr. Thomas Kuhn, who was both a philosopher and a historian of science. And he wrote the book, The Structure of the Scientific Revolution. And in this book, he defined the term paradigm shift as being a fundamental change in an individual's or a society's view of how things work in the world. And the question he was asking is, how are advances made in science and medicine? Are they made in a stepwise fashion. They're slow, they're steady. Every sign just adds a little bit more to the information, and there are a few surprises. Or are they chaotic and destabilizing? And the conclusion he came up with is that the most profound advances that we've had in healthcare and in science are often destabilizing and unexpected. And one of the obvious examples of this, it doesn't relate to medicine, but it relates to the way that we view our solar system. We used to have a geocentric model that came from religion, where every planet, the sun, the moon, revolved around Earth. And then we had the concept of a heliocentric solar system, where the planets are actually revolving around the sun. And this brought huge instability between science and religion, as many of you realize. Here's a very common medical paradigm shift that I'm sure everyone here is familiar with, the germ theory of disease. Dr. Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician in the 1800s, noticed that when doctors delivered babies, there was a much higher death rate of both the mother and the infant compared to when midwives did the delivery. And he noticed that the doctors were coming from autopsy, where they were trying to, decide what caused a particular person to die. And then they would go into the delivery rooms and deliver babies without washing their hands. And his concept was they should definitely wash their hands, because there was something that was being transferred from the doctor to the pregnant woman. But back then, it was unthinkable that tiny microbes that are too small to be seen could actually make people sick. Here is a visual paradigm shift. I'm sure many of you have seen this as well. There's potentially two different animals that you can see in this image, a duck or a rabbit. And here's another one that's quite common, where you see a woman. She might be elderly or she might be quite young, depending on what you focus on. So there's no right or wrong. There are just two ways of looking at the same object. And similarly, with the paradigm shift I'm referring to, there's no right or wrong, but I think we have to include a little bit more of physics into our understanding of biology. Now, when I was going through high school and university, taking courses on the human body, we were told that the body consists of a bag of chemicals that's mostly consisting of water. And the concept of trying to assess someone's health is also based on chemistry. We measure blood chemistry, we measure urine chemistry, that sort of thing. And we treat health effects with chemicals as well. In some cases to resolve the issue, but in most cases simply to get rid of symptoms. And so what I'm suggesting is that we move from a chemical model of the human body to an energy or frequency model of the human body, and use electromagnetic frequencies to both assess and treat, in addition to chemicals that we use to assess and treat. So it's simply increasing the toolbox for healthcare providers. And a very good example of a medical paradigm shift, I think, is shown here with our concept of how hormones work and how cell membrane receptors work. We're told that it has a lock and key. So the hormone has a certain shape and size. The receptor has a certain shape and size. And if the key fits, then you can unlock that particular receptor. Now, if we ask the question, can you unlock a door at a distance? If we asked that question 50 years ago, people would look at us as though we were crazy, but we do this all the time. So we're using electromagnetic energy that's actually providing information in order to unlock doors at a distance. We're using physics, not chemistry. And this concept is discussed in the book by James Oshman, Energy, Medicine, the Scientific Basis, which I highly recommend. Now, here's an article that came out in 2016, Non-Chemical and Non-Contact Cell-to-Cell Communication, a short review. And the authors claim the following: in our opinion, the research on principles of non-chemical and non-contact cell-to-cell communication has the potential to offer new fundamental insights into biological processes. This is not energy we're talking about in terms of ATP, but rather information provided to the body and to the cells. So what constitutes the death of a person? Well, it's the absence of a heartbeat. What constitutes brain death? Lack of brainwave activity. And what constitutes cell death is when we have a reduced or an absence of an electrical potential across the cell membrane. When there is a reduction in the electrical potential gradient, the cell begins to die and is unable to transport materials into and out of the cell. So the death is absence of electromagnetic frequencies. I'm now going to turn our attention to the sources of electromagnetic frequencies, both natural and artificial. These include three different categories. There's something called geofields. These are natural, non-living sources of electromagnetic energy. We then have biofields. These are natural, living sources of electromagnetic energy. And we have technofields. These are artificial, non-living sources of electromagnetic energy that comes from much of the technology that we've been using in the past 100 to 200 years. And where these three Venn diagrams overlap is where we have effects of technofield, biofield, geofield interactions. Now let's take a look at some of the natural non-living sources that we're exposed to on planet Earth. We have sunshine. We have solar flares. We have the northern lights. We have cosmic radiation coming in at very high frequencies. Much of it is blocked by our atmosphere. We have lightning. We have a geomagnetic field that is fairly stable, although it does oscillate slightly from time to time and can actually flip when we're dealing with hundreds of thousands of years. We also have positive and negative air ions that can affect human health. And we have the Schumann resonance that people refer to as the heartbeat of planet Earth. And I'd just like to give you one example of how positive air ions can affect living organisms. So we can have negative ions, which tend to be health promoting. This is when there's a preponderance of negative versus positive ions in the atmosphere. And the ground is electrically negative. So when we're in contact with the ground, we're actually being grounded. And the number of electrons are equilibrating between our body and the earth. Positive ions, in contrast, tend to make people sick, and it affects our hormones. And so when we're dealing with urban settings, where we're dealing with pavement, we're dealing with synthetic clothes and synthetic shoes that isolate us from the earth. When we're in a car with rubber tires, we're actually being isolated from the earth. And so we're not in contact, we're not being grounded, we're not getting the negative ions from the earth that our body requires. And this is a brilliant study that I found published in 1974. And it talks about different types of wind or weather sensitivities that people experience. And in this particular study, Dr. Schulman and colleagues found that 25% of the population complained of weather sensitivity due to serotonin irritation syndrome when they were exposed to a preponderance of positive ions. And he said, or they said, that negative ions provide both a prophylactic and a therapeutic relief to 75% of the subjects that were tested. And there was 129 participants in this particular test. Now, I experienced this personally quite a few years ago now. I was attending a conference in Poland, and I began to get a headache. I felt dizzy. I felt nauseous. It felt as though I was coming down with the flu. And so I asked our host if she had any aspirins, because I seldom get headaches and I don't travel with them. And she said that I must be reacting to the Föhn event that was happening at the time with a preponderance of positive ions. So positive ions can make people sick. And when it comes to where these positive and negative ions tend to predominate, you can see here that near a waterfall in the country, in a forest, you have a preponderance of negative ions. And in built-up areas, you have a preponderance of positive ions. And that's probably one reason, one of several reasons, of why when people go for a walk in the forest or go for have a shower or are near a waterfall, that they feel much better. Now, we can share ions as well. So as soon as you touch someone or something, your body is going to equilibrate with ions, negative ions flowing between the two individuals. And you can see here the touch is a very important animal behavior that we all value. And according to Dr. James Oshman, electrons can act as antioxidants. So free electrons from the earth can resolve chronic inflammation by serving as natural antioxidants. And he recommends grounding for people who have inflammation in order to help them recover. Now, when it comes to planet Earth, a certain amount of radiation penetrates through the atmosphere. And here we have the electromagnetic spectrum from extremely low frequency to the top left, all the way to gamma rays and X-rays that are ionizing. And according to this particular visual, it shows you that visible light from outer space comes right through and comes right down to planet Earth, right to the ground. And we have optical telescopes. That's why we can see the sun, the moon, the stars, because visible light actually penetrates. Infrared light also penetrates, which is simply heat or warmth, and a small amount of ultraviolet light penetrates right to the ground level. And some of this can be associated with sunburns and things of that nature. We also see here that part of the radio frequency and microwave spectrum from outer space penetrates right to ground level. And we have things called radio telescopes that are actually picking up very weak signals from the solar system, trying to understand where they're coming from and what they mean. And one of these telescopes is in Green Bank, West Virginia. In this particular environment, they don't have radio reception, radio stations. They don't allow people to use microwave ovens or cell phones because these would interfere with the whispers coming from outer space. And it's one place that people who are electrosensitive, and I'll be talking about these individuals in a moment, that's sometimes where they will go in order to get away from the man-made sources of radiation. Now, when it comes to natural living sources of electromagnetic fields, we have the cell membrane, electrical potential across the cell membrane. We have the heart beating. We have biophotons that we can measure now. We can measure brainwave activity and learn about the state of the individual. We can measure infrared radiation, temperature, whether you're using infrared camera or a thermometer. And this provides us with information about the health of the organism. We also have acupuncture points that vary in conductivity from nearby cells. And there are certain animals that have very special properties dealing with their use of electricity. The electric eel, for example, that could stun its prey by putting out an electric current into the water. And even the simplest organism, this is a bacteria that has magnetoreceptors, this chain of black pearls are consisting of magnetite. And so this individual can actually determine the difference between the North and South Pole of the planet. And this particular adaptation is for bacteria that are called anaerobic. So they are poisoned by oxygen, and they spend most of their time living in deep sediments or deep waters where there's very little or no oxygen present. And so when you have a disturbance at the surface of the water or at the surface of the sediments, these bacteria will aim towards the Earth's magnetic field. So if they're in the North Pole, they will aim towards the North magnetic field, and bacteria in the South Pole will aim towards the South magnetic field, which takes them into an anoxic environment. And indeed, many species that migrate, whether it's birds or fish or turtles or other species, they have magnetite crystals in various parts of their body to help them with this navigation. Now, we have natural sources of electromagnetic fields interacting with living organisms, and they can be both beneficial and harmful. Some of the beneficial ones include photosynthetic activity, include the production of vitamin D, for example. They play a role in reproduction, in our circadian rhythm, etc. And then you can have harmful effects from air ionization, as I've already mentioned, from solar flares causing illness, skin cancer. So there can be both positive and negative interactions. And indeed, you can have biofield interactions, and therapeutic touch would be one example of this. And whether that's due to electrons being transferred or guided through the practitioner can be discussed later on. We also have geofield interactions, and we know that the Earth's magnetic field actually shields us from the solar wind and some of the ionizing radiation. So we have interactions between biofield, geofield, and geofield interactions. We also have technofield interactions. And when these are negative, we call them electromagnetic interference. And a prime example is if you drive your car listening to an AM radio. If you drive your car under high voltage transmission lines, you will hear static. There is interference between the high intensity electric field and the radio frequency radiation that's coming in through your radio in your car. And then we have technofield and biofield interactions as well. Some of these are negative and some of these are positive. And this is what most of my lecture today is going to be discussing. We also know that there are some people that affect technology. Some people can't wear watches. And years ago, when we had rabbit ear antennas, some of you who are old enough may remember that sometimes to get the best reception, we would have to move the rabbit ear antennas. And sometimes the best reception was when we were holding the antenna. So our body was actually part of the antenna system. And there's evidence today that DNA and other parts of our cellular system have antenna-like properties as well. So what do we know about electromagnetic exposure? Well, we know that electromagnetic fields and electromagnetic radiation are forms of air pollution. We call this electrosmog rather than chemical smog. It comes from stationary sources, mobile sources. We have it in our home. Our behavior increases or decreases the amount that we're exposed. And many people now wear wearables that tell them about their heart rate, how many steps they take. And these are often emitting electromagnetic fields. We know that electrosmog is generated by wireless technology, by electronic devices, and by our use of electricity. And you can see here some of the common sources of electrosmog in our homes. Electrosmog falls into 4 categories, as I'm going to show here, and all of them are associated with chronic illness. We have extremely low frequency electric and magnetic fields. We have radio frequency and microwave radiation, which is what I'll be spending most of my talk about. We have something called dirty electricity, and we have something called ground current. And all of these are shown in the scientific literature to adversely affect living organisms, humans, animals, and plants in certain cases. And we also know that electrosmog exposure is increasing exponentially. And this is what is making people sick and causing a great deal of concern in the scientific and medical community. Now, if we take a very quick look at the history of electrosmog, it started roughly at the turn of the last century, where electricity was introduced, both 50 and 60 hertz, depending on where in the planet you're living. We had radio frequency introduced in the 1920s, roughly. We had microwaves generated by our use of radar. Microwave ovens, originally called radar ranges, are now in most homes. These also use microwave radiation, and many of our wireless technology uses microwave radiation. And then for a 40-year period, we had advances in personal computing, energy-efficient light bulbs, cell phones, Wi-Fi, smart meters, and a variety of green forms of electricity, from wind turbines to solar radiation. And in the 2020s, millimeter waves were first introduced, and this is part of our 5G Internet of Things. So we've had a huge number of frequencies added to our environment since the turn of the last century. And we now have smart homes, smart cars, smart cities, and satellites beaming radiation onto the planet. So it's very hard to get away from all of this. But perhaps the best way to show the rapid increase in our exposure is looking at Wi-Fi hotspots globally. This is the map of Wi-Fi hotspots in 2005. You can see here that there are little purple and yellowish dots, primarily in United States and Europe. And this is what it looked like 15 years later. So you can see here that a lot more countries are now exposed, some more than others, and it's very hard to get away from this radiation. Now let's have a look at some of the harmful effects of electromagnetic fields, and I'm going to focus here on the middle one, toxic frequencies, that we talked about earlier. What do we know about the effects? Well, the effects tend to fall into three categories: reproduction, cancers, and neurological effects that we have classified as electro-hypersensitivity. When we do science, scientists look at three different aspects when they're asking questions. They use epidemiological studies that show an association between agent and some sort of effect. We have in vivo studies in living organisms, and these studies answer questions about cause-effect relationships. And we have in vitro studies, or in glassware, and these studies tell us about the mechanisms. When all three of these types of studies point in the same direction, scientists have greater confidence that what they're studying is real and not some sort of artifact or something happening by chance. Now, the effects that I've referred to in this slide were known back in the 1970s. This is a paper by Dr. Zori Glaser from the Naval Medical Research Institute, published in 1971. And here you can see that many of the disorders that they were referring to, with over 2,000 references, are similar to the ones that are being studied even today. So we've known about this for more than 50 years. So let's turn our attention now to reproduction and development. And here we're dealing with both human and animal studies. Now, it's important that men and women not keep their cell phone in a hip pocket, and that they not work on their personal computers or tablets with them in their lap when they're on Wi-Fi mode. And the reason for that is that it can affect our reproductive organs. Women are born with all of their eggs, and so if there's any damage to the egg, that can affect their ability to reproduce, and it can lead to infertility and birth defects. Men produce new sperm every 3 months, so it's ideal that if that a male wants to impregnate his partner, that they wait at least 3 months of not having their cell phone near their pocket to ensure that they're fertile. So what evidence do we have for reproductive impairment? I'm simply going to show you one study. And this is a study that was published in, gosh, when was it published? Okay, I don't quite know the date of the 2006. So it's fairly old now. And here they looked at men who went to infertility clinics, and they classified them into 4 different groups. Men who didn't use a cell phone, those who used a cell phone for less than 2 hours a day, 2 to 4 hours a day, and greater than 4 hours a day. And what they found was that there was a decrease in the number of sperm per mil. There was a reduction in mobility of the sperm. The sperm didn't live as long, and they were abnormally shaped. So there were very few, only 18% of the sperm had a normal shape. And an abnormally shaped sperm simply cannot successfully impregnate a female egg. Now, what about childhood development? Here's a story by Cindy Sage and Ernesto Burgio, how wireless technologies may affect childhood development. And one of the things that they mention is that there's an increase in stress and anxiety. There's an increase in addictive behavior. There's a global decline in academic performance by reliance on computer technology. And there's an increase in symptoms that are similar to autism and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I'm going to talk about these 2 in the next few slides. So let's look at ADHD. This is the prevalence rate for ADHD for males in the top graph and females in the bottom graph in Denmark. And you can see here that around 1998, the prevalence, this is the number per 1,000 persons, began to increase. And the highest levels were for young men between the ages of 6 to 24 years. The levels also increased for women, but at a much lower rate. And these are some of the symptoms associated with ADHD. And the ones I have here in orange, the learning disabilities, anxiety, depression, bedwetting problems, sleep disorders, are ones that have been attributed to electrosmog in other studies. Here we have information on autism and how it's, once again, increasing in different locations. You can see here that it's increasing in Denmark, it's increasing in California, and with a very high increase in Japan as well. And it's also increasing globally. Now, we know a lot of things can cause autism, and we've been told it's a combination of genetics, environment, and behavior. I would like to suggest that it's mostly environment and behavior, because genetics doesn't change that quickly in humans. And electrosmog needs to be added to this list of potential causal agents to autism. So when a doctor advises their patient who's pregnant, they're told not to drink alcohol, not to take drugs, not to smoke. They should also be told not to be exposed to Wi-Fi and other forms of microwave radiation. So let's turn our attention to the second major consequence, and that's cancer. Once again, we rely on a number of human studies, and we rely on a number of animal studies for this information. So when it comes to cancer in humans, there are some that are a little bit more studied than others. There's 2 forms of brain tumors that have been studied: gliomas, that I'll be talking about extensively, and meningiomas. A meningioma is a tumor of the lining of the brain. We also have an increase in something called acoustic neuroma. This is the auditory nerve. We have salivary gland tumors that are increasing, and we have evidence for breast cancer increasing for women who keep their cell phone in their bras for at least a period of 10 years. The cancer appears immediately underneath where they kept their cell phone. In 2011, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified radio frequency radiation as a possible human carcinogen. And they classified it as possible for one reason only, and that was because back then there was only one large-scale, multi-year, multi-million-dollar study that was conducted with rats. And this was done by the US Air Force, looking at 2.45 gigahertz, which is the same frequency we use for our microwave ovens, for example. And in this study, they found that there was a 100% increase in metastatic tumors and a 260% increase in primary tumors. But because it was the only large-scale study, there were a lot of smaller studies, the IARC decided it could only classify it as possible. And what we needed was more large-scale, multi-million-dollar studies. And lo and behold, in 2018, 2 such studies were published, one by the National Toxicology Program in the United States, and one by the Ramazzini Institute in Italy. And now we're looking at 3 different types of frequencies, 2.45 gigahertz, 900 megahertz, and 1800 megahertz as well. And what these 2 studies showed is that there's an increase in gliomas, the brain tumor that we also mentioned above here, heart schwannomas, and that there's evidence for DNA damage. So these studies together change it from a possible human carcinogen to a probable human carcinogen. Now, back in 1996, Dr. Om Gandhi and colleagues calculated the amount of radiation that would penetrate the head of a 5-year-old child, a 10-year-old child, and an adult if a cell phone was held at the ear. And you can see here that the amount of radiation absorbed by the head of a 5-year-old child, 4.49 watts per kilogram, is much higher than for an adult. And so we know that children absorb more energy than adults from the same cell phone. We knew that tumors in the midbrain are more deadly than those in the temporal lobe. And because we're getting greater penetration, some of the tumors won't be at the temporal lobe, they'll be in the midbrain. We know that children's cells are reproducing more quickly. And because of that, the cancers tend to grow much more quickly as well. The children's immune system is not as well developed as an adult's, and that once again will promote the growth of cancer. And we have a longer potential for lifetime exposure for children than for adults. So it's really important to protect children against this radiation. Dr. Leonard Hardell and co-workers published this paper in 2009, and they stated that there was an increase in ipsilateral tumors. These are tumors on the same side of the head that you use a cell phone, for people who had used a cell phone for at least 10 years. There was a 90% increase in gliomas, a 60% increase in acoustic neuromas, and a 320% increase in uveal melanomas. Now, this last one has not been replicated, and that might be simply due to chance. When they asked the question, who is at greater risk for an increase in brain tumors, the answer was people who used a cell phone for the first time under the age of 20. And for them, there was a 420% increased risk of developing an ipsilateral tumor. Now, you might ask the question, well, are brain tumors increasing globally? And this is a study that came from the United Kingdom on one particular type of brain tumor, glioblastoma multiforme, a deadly type of brain tumor. And so here we have the H standardized incidence rate for a combination of brain tumors from 1995 to 2015. And you can see here that the line is fairly linear with perhaps a slight increase starting around 2008 or so. But this is for a combination of several types of brain tumors. There are certain types of brain tumors that are actually decreasing in prevalence. And here we now have glioblastoma multiforme at the frontal and temporal lobe. And here you can see a quite dramatic increase from 2 per 100,000 people, or 2.3 per 100,000 people, to 5. So this is the age standardized incidence rate. And when it comes to different age groups, the greatest change in glioblastoma multiforme is for males between the ages of 15 and 90. So using a cell phone under the age of 20 increases your risk of developing a glioblastoma quite substantially. And this is for the period 1995-99 to 2011-2015. So you might ask yourself, well, what was different in the UK between these 2 time periods? And we can actually get that information here. So here we have the mobile cellular subscriptions per 100 people in different countries. By 2004, there were more than 100 subscriptions in the United Kingdom. During this time, the number of subscriptions per 100 people was 60, roughly, in the United States. It was about 45, 50 in Canada, and it was about 30 in the world. And these are two time periods on the previous graph that were compared. So during this time period, there was very few people with cell phone subscriptions. And here we have an oversaturation, which means that some individuals have more than one cell phone subscription. Now, when it comes to electromagnetic radiation, we have the third effect, and which is called electrohypersensitivity. The scientific community got together recently and they realized that there were so many different names used for this particular illness that they wanted to standardize it. And they decided on the term electromagnetic radiation syndrome, although these are some of the other terms that have been used in the literature. And I'm going to use electrohypersensitivity primarily in this presentation, simply because that's what it was referred to in the previous studies that I'm referring to. So what evidence do we have that electromagnetic radiation can make people sick? Well, we know that microwave radiation affects the blood, the heart, and the autonomic nervous system. And I published on this in 2013. And here what I've done is I've taken a pinprick, put a drop of blood under a microscope, and looked at it under a dark field microscopy. And I live and work in a low electromagnetic field environment. And this is what my blood looked like. It's fairly healthy looking blood. Some of the cells are free. Some of the cells are close to others. And I exposed myself to a Wi-Fi router for 10 minutes. And within 10 minutes, you can see that there's virtually no single blood cell. All of the blood cells are clinging together. And this is called rouleau formation. According to Dr. Stephen Sinatra, our blood should have the consistency of red wine. And instead, it looks like ketchup and has the consistency of ketchup in his medical practice. And this is basically caused by the rouleau formation for whatever reason. What this does is it increases the risk of high blood pressure, headaches, and both strokes and heart failure. And I'm going to provide some information on strokes and heart failure in the next coming slides. I work with people who are electrohypersensitive, and many of them were telling me that when they're exposed to the radiation, they develop pain or pressure in the chest area, and sometimes they have a rapid heart rate or an irregular heart rate, and they feel as though they're having a heart attack. So this is quite stress-inducing for them, both physically, physiologically, and psychologically. So we asked the question, does radiation from a cordless phone affect the heart? We know how to measure the heart, and we know how to do a proper type of study. So we invited participants to lie down. We exposed them blindly to the radiation from a cordless phone base station, and we monitored their heart. The doctor who looked at the data was also blinded. So this is called a double-blinded, placebo-controlled study, and it's been replicated. So this is the gold standard in science. And we published this in 2010. Provocation study using heart rate variability shows that microwave radiation from 2.4 gigahertz cordless phone affects the autonomic nervous system. Now, Health Canada's guideline for this radiation is 10 million microwatts per meter squared, averaged over a 6-minute period. The people in our experiment were exposed to 50 microwatts as the maximum radiation, and they were exposed for approximately 3-minute intervals. This is less than 1% of safety code 6, so there shouldn't have been any effect according to Health Canada. And I'm going to show you results from 2 subjects. This is subject A, and what this graph is showing is the change in heart rate over 3-minute periods. This is their heart rate. This is pre-exposure, 58 beats per minute, when they were exposed to the radiation from the cordless phone, and a sham exposure. And this person is non-responsive. The radiation didn't affect their autonomic nervous system in a way that we could monitor. Now, this is subject B. And here we have their heart rate. You can see here that when they were exposed to the radiation from the phone, their heart rate doubled. When the radiation was turned off, it returned to normal, and then it doubled again. And this is a highly responsive person who is experiencing tachycardia, which is a heart rate over 100 beats per minute. And yes, does radiation from a cordless phone affect the heart? The answer to that is yes, it can, if you happen to be sensitive. And this is less than 0.5% of safety code 6. So effects do occur below federal guidelines, and effects are triggered by radio frequency exposure, something that our current government and the government in the United States and the government in the UK and the government in Australia simply do not agree with. So how long have we known that microwave radiation affects the heart? This is a conference that was published in 1969. And in that conference, they state the following: in the interests of occupational hygiene, researchers have recommended the cardiovascular abnormalities be used as a screening criteria to exclude people from occupations involving radio frequency exposures. Perhaps students should be screened to ensure no underlying heart condition that may be exacerbated with Wi-Fi exposure. And I say this not in jest. In Simcoe County, in Ontario, Canada, they started to introduce Wi-Fi into schools. And students were coming home complaining of headaches, complaining of racing heart, being unable to concentrate in the classroom. One student had a racing heart after the Wi-Fi was installed in the school. 4 students had sudden cardiac arrest, 2 of which unfortunately were fatal. The youngest child was 13 years old. And here you can hear it directly from the students themselves.
Hi, I'm Austin Lamond and I'm 14 years old. I go to Mountain View School. I've been suffering weird headaches and dizziness and displacement. Like, it feels like my head is like there's a lot of pressure in my head and it's like repulsing like this. And I just feel like displaced, and then when I'm not there, nothing happens. So, and like I get really like weak, and like it's hard to hold a pencil too, and I can't think straight.
Starting this year at Mountain View, I've been getting a lot of headaches and it's been making me really dizzy, and like it feels like I can't concentrate and you feel like you're not really there. It's hard to explain.
The thing that concerned us was that she always got better when she got home, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. We got her eyes checked and found out that wasn't it, and actually had everything checked and found out that wasn't it. And she's still, to this day, when she goes to class, probably about 4 out of the 5 days that she's there, she's coming home with a headache. And I mean significant headache where she has to take Tylenol.
Now, Dr. Henry Lai with the University of Washington did a review on studies that showed neurological effects of radio frequency radiation from the period 2007 to 2020. He found a total of 355 studies, 3/4 of which showed effects of radio frequency radiation on the nervous system. We know that electromagnetic radiation syndrome can be disabling and is triggered by electromagnetic frequencies. And I published on this as well. Electrohypersensitivity is an environmentally induced disability that requires immediate attention. These are some of the neurological symptoms that I found in the literature associated with electromagnetic exposure. These are the ones that we find primarily in the elderly, and these are the ones we find primarily in the younger generation. So it's definitely affecting the nervous system. Now, we will look back on this years from now. Why on earth do we allow cell towers to be this close to homes? They're making people sick. And I'm going to show you some information about that dealing with 5G small cell antennas. But before I do, this is a study that was done in Spain, published in 2001, for people who lived at different distances from cell phone antennas. The red bars here are those who lived within 10 meters or 30 feet. And the black bars are those who lived beyond 300 meters. Here we have the symptoms in decreasing order: fatigue, sleep disturbances, headaches, feelings of discomfort, etc. And here we have the percentage of respondents experiencing symptoms very often. And you can see here that for those who lived within 10 meters of a cell tower, 70% of them experienced fatigue very often. And those that were beyond 300 meters, that dropped to 26%. Now, the symptoms I have here in red are those that we tend to experience as we age. And sometimes people who have developed electrohypersensitivity will simply say, well, it's not really sensitivity, I'm just getting older. And when you get older, it's harder to more difficult to concentrate, your sleep gets worse, that sort of thing. So I call this rapid aging syndrome. And I'm not referring to aging on the outside. I'm actually referring to aging on the inside. Microwave radiation affects cells. It causes free radical damage and oxidative stress. And if your cells are developing oxidative stress, they die. Your body has to resorb them and replace them. And this takes a lot of energy. So no wonder people who are exposed to this kind of environment that's causing this oxidative stress are actually so tired, because their body is working overtime trying to replace the dead and dying cells. So how many people are affected by electromagnetic radiation syndrome? According to Michael Bevington, 0.65% can't work. And this is in developed countries, by the way. 1.5% are severely affected, 5% are moderately affected, and 30% have mild effects. And if we look at Canada, which is where I live, with a population of 40 million, we have approximately 12 million people who are mildly affected, 2 million moderately affected, and about 600,000 that are severely affected. And if we add other locations, these are the numbers that we come up with. Now, for Africa, Asia, and globally, the levels are probably lower than what I have here, because they're simply, some of those countries are simply not as developed and are not exposed to as much radiation as we are here in Canada, United Kingdom, the US, that sort of thing. Those who can't work and are severely affected by this radiation are classified as disabled. And if we look at the comparison to diabetes, the prevalence globally, there's about 800 million people, according to the World Health Organization, that have diabetes. And that's much lower than the 2.5 billion that have mild effects of electrosmog. And it's about twice as high as those who are moderately affected. So we're really dealing with a pandemic globally. Now, I'd like to give you one example of 5G because it's something that for some reason is being developed and pushed on us, even though there's very little evidence that we need it and that it works as well as it ought to. This is a paper by Dr. Cindy Russell, and she looked at the public health and environmental implications of 5G technology. And she found that some frequencies cause pronounced arrhythmia, which we've already shown with other frequencies. Cataracts are on the increase as your eyes are very sensitive to this form of radiation. In laboratory studies, there's evidence that it impairs the immune system, that it causes birth defects, and it causes antibiotic resistance. Yet we're still rolling this out globally and exposing very large populations. Dr. Leonard Hardell and Mona Nielsen have done several reports now on 5G radiation, and I'd like to share with you one of their studies that I think demonstrates the effects very profoundly. This is an apartment in Sweden where the 4G and 5G antennas up at the top on the roof of this building were replaced by 5G antennas. And here we have the types of exposure. in the bedroom of this apartment in 2021, when there were still 3G, 4G antennas, the levels of microwave radiation were now 9,000 microwatts per meter squared. Once the 5G was introduced, the levels went up each time. The people couldn't live in their building, so they moved to an office space where the levels were lower. They eventually purchased a house in the country where the levels were really low. This particular value, greater than 2.5 million microwatts per meter squared, actually topped the meter. That was as high as the meter would go. And just a reminder, Health Canada's guideline is 10 million. So we were still way under Health Canada's guideline. Now here we have information from the previous slide, the place and date, the amount of exposure. And in blue, we have symptoms. The light blue is the number of symptoms. The dark blue is the total symptom intensity. And these are the symptoms for the husband and wife that lived here. You can see the symptoms along this column here: dizziness, insomnia, fatigue. And the numbers represent the severity of the symptoms, with the higher numbers being more severe. And you can see here that when the 5G was introduced and they were living in the apartment with 5G antennas, the number of symptoms they had and the severity of those symptoms increased dramatically, especially for the women living in this environment. We're finding that there's a predominance of females versus males getting electro-hypersensitivity. So now let's shift to the beneficial effects of electromagnetic frequencies. And here we're looking at that electromagnetic model, both the essential frequencies and the need for cells to communicate electromagnetically. And I'd like to bring your attention to Dr. Robert O. Becker, that I'm sure some of you have heard about. He wrote two very interesting books, The Body Electric and Cross Currents, where he talks about the perils of electropollution and the promise of electromedicine, which is what I'm going to be mentioning here as well. Now, Dr. Becker worked at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Syracuse. He's an orthopedic surgeon, and he was helping veterans deal with broken limbs, with lost appendages. And he was really a very good research scientist. And he asked the question, why is it that salamanders can regrow their limbs, whereas frogs can't? And so he did some experiments, and he measured the electrical activity right at the place where he severed the limb. And for salamanders, the electrical activity went positive, and then it went negative. And this is when the salamander was actually regenerating its limb. When he measured the same thing for a frog, the intensity went to positive, but it never went to negative. And instead of reforming the digits, there was only a stub that was reintroduced. And so he thought the negative potential was very important. And so they started doing experiments. We introduced a negative electrode at the side where there was a breakage in the bone, a non-union where the bones were not in contact. A non-union fracture is virtually impossible to heal. But when they put an electrode there, they found the fractures healed within a matter of 8 weeks. Today, we no longer have to place a negative electrode into the body. We can simply place an electromagnetic field around the body and have the same type of beneficial effect. Now, in 1979, the Food and Drug Administration approved pulsed electromagnetic fields for bone healing. And Dr. Andrew Bassett, who was one of the leaders in this field, published this paper in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. And he said the pulsed electromagnetic fields were effective in 75% of the cases that they actually studied. So this was something that was approved quite early on. Today, pulsed electromagnetic fields are used for a variety of healings, including depression, and it's also used by veterinarians for their animals. So this is not a placebo effect. It really does benefit the body. So I was interested, does this actually work? When the PEMF mats started coming out, I actually purchased one and decided to do a test. And one of the claims they made is that pulsed electromagnetic fields can enhance blood circulation. So once again, I took a drop of my blood, put it under a microscope, And this is what my blood looked like at the time. I had been working on a computer, not with Wi-Fi, but I was still exposed to the electromagnetic fields from the computer. And you can see that quite a few of the cells are sticking together in small rouleau mounds. I exposed myself for 8 minutes to a PEMF, and this is what my blood looked like. So the bloods were almost like they were charged up, like a battery would charge a battery cell, and they began to repel each other. So this is much healthier looking blood than you can see here in slide 1. And so what are the benefits of pulsed electromagnetic fields? Well, they improve circulation, oxygen transport. They help with the removal of waste products, and they prevent blood clots. Now, I've traveled to quite a few different countries globally, particularly in Europe and North America. And we went to the Bioelectromagnetic Energy Regulation Institute in Liechtenstein, where they had a technology called the beamer. And this is the CEO of the company at the time. And he introduced us to some of the work done by Dr. Rainier Klopp, who is an expert in microcirculation in Berlin. And this is what he found when he exposed people to the beamer and looked at blood circulation in the body. So this is prior to the beamer treatment. And you can see here that the blood seems, it looks like a traffic jam during rush hour. And this is after a beamer treatment. And you can see here the blood is flowing much more smoothly. Not everywhere, but in most cases. So let's have a look at that again. This is after treatment on the left and before treatment on the right. And you can see here that the microcirculation has been augmented by exposure to beamer for just a few minutes. One of the other doctors that we visited was Dr. Jeff Marangel in Pennsylvania. He runs the Bioenergy Metabolic Institute. And he had a patient that he was dealing with when we visited him, excuse me, who had chronic back pain. And Dr. Marangel uses a lot of interstitial scans and various ways of assessing the body. He's really an expert in this area. And here, this is one of his patients who had chronic back pain that Dr. Marangel wasn't able to treat. He placed 2 electrodes to the forehead. His hands, patient's hands were on 2 metal plates, and their feet were on metal plates as well. And his body was scanned. And this is what the scan looked like. So what this interstitial scan showed was that where there was red in the vertebrae, that's where you had nerve inflammation causing the chronic back pain. In this particular case, the patient was exposed to a Rumart, which is produced in Quebec, and it stands for treating rheumatism and arthritis. He had, I think, a 10-minute treatment, after which time 80% of the back pain was reduced based on his subjective estimate. And a scan, an electrointerstitial scan immediately following, showed that the inflammation had been removed. 2 weeks later, the pain had not returned. So this was a short 10-minute treatment that was lasting for weeks at a time. Another study we did was with Centurion. This is a device that's made in Canada. And this has just a small number of frequencies, 2, 8, 15, and 30 hertz. And we tested it on patients who had osteoarthritis. And I'm going to show you one of the results from one of our patients. This was a 65-year-old female who was unable to make a fist. She was unable to raise her left arm above her left shoulder. And you can see how much mobility she has by placing her hands at her back. We did a 30-minute treatment, after which time she could make a fist. She was able to raise her hands, her arms above her head, and she was able to raise her arms behind her back. So she had much greater mobility and much less pain. After 9 treatments, there was even more improvement. And I placed a circle around her left hand because you can see here that the distance between her first finger and her middle finger is now much smaller than it was in the previous slides, so that was also improving over time. CKIX is another device. This comes from Italy. It's registered as a Class 2 medical device, has a number of preset programs that deal with brainwave activity, as well as things like regeneration, wound fractures, microcirculation, etc. This is slightly different than some of the others in the sense that it measures what your body requires. So there's a test where you can actually design your own personal prescription card. So instead of a pharmaceutical or a nutraceutical, we have an electroceutical device. And you can take this home, put it into your home unit, and then treat yourself on a daily basis or whatever is recommended. Now, there's been a lot of studies with CKIX. There's a lot of excellent research coming out of Italy. And I'm going to share with you just one of their studies that relates to electromagnetic exposure. We know that electromagnetic exposure causes oxidative stress in the body. And MDA is a biomarker for oxidative stress. So this is a study that was looking at the effects of extremely low magnetic therapy and oxidative balance in 32 healthy volunteers. And here we have the number of subjects sorted by their MDA value before the pulsed electromagnetic treatment. And this is showing you the levels in their blood. And this is what happened after the PEMF. So for those that had a very low MDA value to start with, sometimes the levels went up, sometimes they remained the same, and sometimes they came down. But for those that had a greater than 0.2 MDA value, in all cases, the levels came down. So that we know here that this particular program on CKIX can actually benefit those that have oxidative stress in their bodies, which is a very positive thing. Here's a foot injury that's very difficult to heal normally, healed by CKIX in a matter of a few months. And if you look at the number of studies that have looked at various PEMF and health concerns, I did a quick review, and this is bone healing, more than 4,000 studies, looking at pain and PEMF, looking at inflammation, a lot of studies, wound healing, nerves, cancer, diabetes. And you can see here that there's really quite a few different types of testing that has been done with pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. And here we have evidence for pulsed electromagnetic field therapy used in dentistry. I was actually quite surprised when I found these results, more than 21,000 results as of September 2020. And here's one study that's quite old, 1971, showing that patients who were treated with PEMF therapy after surgery and both before and after surgery, they had much less pain or much greater pain reduction and much greater inflammation reduction as well. So treating it post-surgery was good, but treating it pre and post-surgery was even better. The same thing happens with colored lights. Blue light has antibacterial effects and has been used in dentistry. Red light is used to stimulate and regenerate tissue damage and reduce inflammation. And once again, if we look at light therapy in dentistry, there's been quite a few studies published recently. Now, there's different types of light therapy, heliotherapy, chromotherapy. So you can have colored light, you can have intense light at certain periods of time. And what's really fascinating is that light can actually carry information. Just like we have fiber optics that carry information, we can have Wi-Fi that uses microwaves to carry information, or we can have something called Li-Fi that uses light to carry information. And whether the Li-Fi is better than the Wi-Fi from a biological perspective is really up for debate. It could be better, but there could be some unexpected consequences of that as well. And I'd like to share with you information from Dr. Dieter Jossner in Germany. He runs medical electronics, and he shows here how light can carry information.
This instrument looks like white light, but a very special light. We can modulate the light with information, whatever it is, sound of music, sound of hypnotism texts, or sound of rhythms of the nature. I will show you how it works. I take here MP3 player, there's just a sound source, nothing else. Switch it on. Then I connect it to this light here, very easy. And now I take a detector to detect the sound of light. I switch it on. And there it is. We have the modulation from the sound recorder modulated to this light. And this light is not flickering, we don't see too much, but the subconscious is receiving it. From the subconscious is moving to the conscious, and after a while it's there. We don't know why, but still there, and we are reacting on this. So with this we can learn languages, we can teach something. That is a very useful light for anything to learn or to treat people.
So when it comes to light, it has energy and it carries information. And these are some of the clinical effects of laser therapy. Increase in angiogenesis, increase in collagen production, muscle regeneration, reduction in inflammation, nerve regeneration, cartilage production, and bone formation. And if you put something in the path of the light, it can actually transfer information from that object into the body. And so if we look at frequency therapy, light therapy, these are the number of studies that have been published on PubMed. Now we know that different lights have different penetration depths, with red light penetrating deepest. Here we show that antibacterial effect between 400 and 500 nanometers. This is the size of the wavelength. Anti-inflammatory 400 to 585. Local microcirculation, and things that function as immunomodulation. You can see they're all in the same range of wavelengths. Here we have recovery after surgery using light therapy. This is post-surgery, 5 days. The slide on the left was treated with light. The slide on the right wasn't, and you can see how more quickly the blood is being resorbed into the body and the body is healing itself. I can't, for the life of me, understand why surgeons are not using PEMF and light therapy more in whatever kind of surgery they're actually providing. Now, there's another technology that we're just started doing research on, auricular chromotherapy. This is for treating anxiety and trauma. And here, what you do is you shine different colored lights on different parts of the ear that deal with acupuncture points and also deal with memory and emotions in the brain. And the effects of this on reducing trauma, post-traumatic stress is absolutely incredible. It's almost hard to believe. And we'll be publishing on that within a couple of weeks as well. So when it comes to PEMF therapy, there's a lot of different things that have been documented in the literature. The important thing is the pulsed electromagnetic fields and light devices do not treat a specific condition. Instead, what they are doing is they're optimizing the body's natural self-healing and self-regulating functions. So just as plants require sunlight for photosynthetic activity, humans require light and different frequencies for optimal health. Now, why do we differ in our responses to electromagnetic fields? Well, there's a number of reasons that I like to refer to these as precursors. The common precursors for electromagnetic radiation syndrome include whiplash. So any kind of physical trauma to the central nervous system can make a person more sensitive to this radiation. Chemical exposure in terms of toxic metals, neurotoxins, particularly like mercury fillings, can increase your sensitivity. Chronic or acute electromagnetic exposure, multiple shocks can make you more electrosensitive. Biological trauma, exposure to black mold, for example, Lyme disease, or a very high load of parasite load can make you sensitive. And anyone who has an impaired immune system either due to age or medication or illness, would tend to be much more sensitive to this radiation. Now, the common symptoms of electrohypersensitivity include difficulty sleeping, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, mood anxieties, difficulty concentrating, visual disturbances, hearing impairment, irregular heart rate, skin problems, dizziness and nausea, the things that we've already documented in some of the studies that have been done. Now, normally these individuals would be prescribed pills to alleviate the symptoms, but if you don't get to the root cause, you're not going to recover. Now, what can we do to improve our health? Well, we refer to this as R squared ID cubed. R, the first R, is for reducing your exposure. So keep the device at least 1.5 to 2.5 centimeters from the body, if it's a cell phone, for example. When it comes to laptop computers, if you read the instructions, it says keep this device at least 20 centimeters from your body. That's about 8 inches. We know that microwave ovens leak. So if you've got a microwave oven and you're using it, it's very important to protect your eyes, to increase the distance, and ideally to go to a different room when you're using your microwave oven. Putting your cell phone into airplane mode and turning Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, personal hotspots off is very important. Texting is less exposure than speaking. Keeping the device away from your body is another critical thing. Use speaker mode. And actually, since the speakers on a cell phone are normally at the bottom, you can put it into a bowl and this will amplify the sound. I've tried it and it seems to work. If it's stationary, wire it. So smart meters, smart appliances, printers, mice, keyboards, home phones can all be wired. Using Ethernet cables or fiber optics is the best choice, but you can also use power line adapters to a certain degree. Use wired instead of wireless whenever possible. So what are the precursors as root cause? Well, we can reduce exposure, and sometimes that's not enough. And so here we have to get to the root cause. Now, looking at cause effect is extremely difficult in science. So have a look at the precursors that your patients might be experiencing and determine whether or not they could be the root cause of the illness. And if someone has physical trauma to their central nervous system, they would have very different treatment than someone who has a high load of mercury, for example. And so the root cause can be dealt with something called R squared ID cubed. And R1 stands for reduce your exposure to the environmental toxins. R2 is reset the limbic system to eliminate emotional trauma. And the auricular chromotherapy could be one of the protocols for that. Build up the immune system, detoxify the body from chemical and biological infections. This can be aided with DNA testing to optimize the detoxification protocol. And dental work is extremely important, from fillings to implants to infections. So all of these are part of the beneficial effects. Now, we require action at all levels, and some of this is outside of our control. So the government, manufacturers, and the telecom industry all have important roles to play. What we need is fiber for at least the last mile. And this is happening. Even the telecom industry recognizes that fiber is more secure and faster than wireless. Distance is your friend. Cell towers should not be placed closer than 500 meters to homes, schools, hospitals, and any place where people spend any period of time. We need radiation-free options. So the smart meter and the smart appliances should be wired for sending information and should not be wireless. And then we need devices that are on demand, which means that they're not radiating constantly. They're only radiating when they're in use. And these are available. Baby monitors are available in Europe, but you can't get those baby monitors here. We've tested some that claim to be low radiation, and they're just the opposite. They're actually quite high levels of radiation. We need green zones. These are zones with no radio frequency radiation. So instead of putting Wi-Fi into parks, we should ban it. We ban smoking in environments. We ban peanuts, asbestos. We have scent-free workplaces. We don't allow spraying of certain types of pesticides in areas known for their toxic effects. And we should have no Wi-Fi in certain areas as well, not only for humans, but it also adversely affects plants, insects, and other species of animals. So what does the future hold? Well, in my mind, electrosmog is going to get a lot worse, and electrotherapy is going to play a greater role in healthcare. And I'm really looking forward to that. So what does the future hold for the electromagnetic radiation syndrome? If we think of this as levels of radiation that are harmful to those who are beneath it, we see here that about a third of the population have mild to moderate effects. If we do nothing and allow 5G to be rolled out, then the levels of exposure are simply going to increase and a larger population is going to be adversely affected. If we begin to reduce exposure and provide safe zones for people to live in and to work in, then we could actually get it down to the low or no effect mark, which is what we should be aiming for. If it doesn't move, it doesn't need to be wireless. A society that doesn't take care of its children doesn't have a future, and we're doing a bad problem taking care of our children. If we do nothing, anxiety-prone children will be taking care of their neurologically damaged parents. We need to stop this insanity. These are some websites that have excellent information, and I would recommend you go to the electrosensitivesociety.com for information on more information on how to reduce your exposure and information that's available for doctors to help them treat their patients. I'd like to thank you very much for this presentation.
Hello. All right. Thank you so much for that information. Really appreciate the presentation that you shared. So for people who want to get in contact with you, can you put your last slide up? I think it had all the websites on it.
Let me just share again. Sorry.
Great.
So my website is magdahavas.com. Zoriglacier.com has a lot of publications dating back to the 50s, 60s, 70s. SLT.co has products for sale in Canada. And powerwatch.org UK has products for sale in the United Kingdom and in Europe. Of course, you can order them globally as well. And then there's a lot of other excellent websites, Safer EMR, EH Trust, Microwave News, Children's Health Defense, firemedical.org, and es-uk.info has information for people in the United Kingdom and globally.
Thank you. And if people want to get in touch with you directly, how would they do that? Through your website?
They could do that through my website. My email is drmagdahavas@gmail.com.
Okay, great. So, so a lot of information shared. So first, one thing you said something about, and I didn't understand this, I wanted clarification. You said something about dental work. Can you explain that? Was that like, is there a problem with people's dental work now that needs to be replaced, or what were you saying with that?
Well, there's issues with dental. They're still putting mercury amalgam into people's mouths, which it doesn't make sense when you understand the harmful effects of mercury. And there have been studies showing that if you have mercury fillings and you use a cell phone or you're exposed to MRI, for example, it will cause that mercury to dissolve and it'll become mobile in your mouth, metabolically mobile. You'll be swallowing it. It'll be absorbed by your body. So exposure to microwaves actually mobilizes mercury in your body if it's coming from things like fillings. So this is very important. People, one of the things I'm learning from the doctors that I'm interacting with is that your mouth is extremely important from the perspective of the microbes you have there, both healthy and unhealthy. And if you have dental cavities, or if you have a dead tooth left in your mouth, that can just be a phenomenal harbor for bacteria. And then that can cause secondary problems in your body as well. And there are different parts of your teeth that are associated with different parts of your body. And so very often the tooth where you have the infection is going to result in something else in your body. It's associated with the same meridian of that tooth for the problem. So any kind of multiple metals in your mouth will make your mouth act like a battery. So if you have gold and silver fillings, for example, that's an absolute no-no. So you want to get rid of all the metal in your mouth. And even things like young children who have dentures, if those dentures, not dentures, what do you call it when you put, when you're trying to straighten your teeth?
Oh, braces?
Braces, thank you. So if you have metal braces, for example, and you're exposed to a Wi-Fi router, that the Wi-Fi will actually hit the metal, and the metal will reflect the microwave radiation. And so if you've got a mouthful of braces and you're exposed to this radiation in school, for example, young children, then that's going to affect their head even more. The levels are going to be higher, and hot spots will develop in their head as well.
Thank you. So, how does one tell if the symptoms are coming from this as opposed to some other, other cause, such as diet or something?
How can you tell if what comes from?
If the symptoms are coming from the electromagnetic frequencies?
Well, it depends if you can measure them. So if you know when you're exposed and when you're not exposed, that's very helpful. They now have meters that are under $200 or very inexpensive that will tell you the relative levels of exposure. And once you start recognizing how you feel in different environments, your body, you'll tend to automatically avoid those environments. But let's assume it's something in your house. Well, you can figure out if you're sensitive to it simply by turning all the power off to your home except for your freezer and fridge, for example. And if you feel that if you do that, at nighttime, for example, just cut the power as much as you can. And if you feel that you're sleeping better or you're feeling slightly better immediately or after a few days, then you might want to turn it back on again and see what happens. So you can begin to do some experiments with yourself. In some cases, when you're using a cell phone, for example, people will initially start feeling warmth in their hand or tingling in their fingers. They'll feel warmth against their head. Sometimes they'll develop a headache, and it goes away once they stop using the phone. So by simply observing your reactions compared to your behavior and exposure, that will go quite a long way in letting you know whether or not you're sensitive and reacting to that radiation.
Okay, now the warmth in your hand and on your head, is that not the phone getting warm? Because if it's not, then I have a problem.
Well, it is the phone getting warm.
Okay.
So, but microwaves, what do we use to heat food? Microwaves at 2.45 frequency. So water absorbs at that frequency. So you're going to have microwaves that's very close to your head. It's going to heat the water to a certain degree. And our guidelines are actually based on a heating effect, which is a very inaccurate, unsensitive form of response. So part of that is just heating of the phone, and part of that is the microwaves as well. But if your temperature goes up by 1 degree, for example, that's considered no-no by the industry and by our government.
Okay, thank you. And now speaking about microwave ovens, when they're off, are they sending out microwaves also, or just
No.
when you're using
Just
them?
when they're on, yeah. I mean, there's a little electromagnetic field around it because simply you've got it plugged into an electrical outlet, but they're only emitting microwaves when you turn it on. I've only measured one microwave oven that didn't leak. Every single oven I've tested leaks microwaves to the point where I could be 20 feet away from it and my meter just buzzes. It's still really quite high. So I do have a microwave oven, and I hate to admit it, I use it from time to time. But when I do, I actually walk out of the kitchen. And I don't walk into the next room behind a wall because it penetrates walls. So I actually walk about 15, 20 feet away from it. When it's done doing its job, I come back and get my nuked food, which probably isn't that healthy.
So now you mentioned like about your eyes. You have to be specifically careful about your eyes. I mean, but if you're in the room, there's no way to really protect your eyes. If it go through a wall, it's gonna go through your hands, it's gonna go through your eyelids. You just the only way to protect your eyes is the same way you protect your whole body, which is to get out of there.
Right. Well, if you actually put your hands over your eyes, that will protect them simply because you've got water in your hands. So your hands are going to absorb some of that radiation. So, closing your eyelids doesn't help very much, but certainly putting anything that has water in it will absorb that radiation. Turning around so that the back of your head is exposed rather than the front of your head will protect your eyes as well. So there are, little things like this, but it's best just to go right out of the room and not have any part of your body exposed. And once you become sensitive, you don't have an option. Like, you feel so unwell in that environment that you simply can't tolerate it. So once you get to the point where you can't tolerate this exposure, you've limited your choices quite considerably.
I feel like people have a very hard time figuring out what makes them ill because they're so ill from so many different things. You can see this with food all the time. I remember, before I began my health journey, I was eating something and it felt terrible. And the person with me was like, "Well, look what you're eating." And I was like, "Oh." And then I had no idea, and I didn't make any correlation because I felt like that all the time. Right? I just felt terrible. To the point where once I got clean and I would eat something, then I could be like, okay, I can't eat that anymore. How, do you find that people who are generally unhealthy, have a harder time realizing that it's that, or you feel that there's something about it that has a uniqueness to it that
Well,
allows them to.
yeah, I would agree with you. I think a lot of us are unaware of our bodies and what we're doing to it. And if we feel ill all the time from a variety of reasons, we don't notice a difference. So I agree with you in that regard. But a lot of the people I work with, they've systematically ruled things out in their lives. They've actually, they feel so unhealthy that they've stopped doing this, and then they watch their body, and they, add this, and they watch their body. So many of them, by the time they come to me, they tell me their symptoms. They tell me they think they're reacting to the radiation, which they think is crazy because they've been told no one reacts to this radiation, So they're really beginning to doubt their own sanity in some cases. But the symptoms are so consistent, and unfortunately, they can be due to other things as well. But the fatigue, the inability to sleep, the pain that moves around your body, the anxiety for no reason. And if you start measuring some of these, body sensors, then you begin to pick it up as soon as they're exposed. This is what happens. So, my research is, cause effect, like expose them, check before and after, and see what happens, right? And so there's little else that could come in and affect those results because they're done instantaneously.
And how long does it take for someone to feel the difference? I work near a router, right? I mean, it's right behind me, and so how if I shut it off, how long would it take for me to feel the effects of no longer having that in my presence?
Well, it varies. So the way it normally starts with individuals is that they're exposed, they don't feel anything. They continue to be exposed. They start feeling the symptoms, and then they become more and more sensitive. So the time between exposure and feeling symptoms becomes less and less. And then sometimes, as soon as they stop the exposure, their symptoms go away. And sometimes there's a delay in going away. So depending on how sensitized you've become, how compromised your body has become, it will take either, short periods of benefit, like immediate benefit, to a prolonged time before you begin to feel the benefits, depending on the level of compromise of your body.
Thanks. And so you've a lot of times you see, the head and the tumor in the head, or you see that penetrating the head. You see, you talked about the breasts, where you have the phone in your shirt or your bra. What about your hands? Like that you're holding it all the time. People walk around with it in their hands. Are people getting hand cancer? Like what's going on with the hands?
No, it's affecting your circulation, obviously, if you're holding it in your hand. But there's no sensitive organs in your hand, right? You have blood vessels and you have nerves and things of that nature, but your kidney and your liver and these things that do special functions aren't in your hand. So it's less of a problem. But even then, I would recommend that you simply put it down and talk to it rather than holding it in or on your body.
And how long, you're running around, but people carry their phone with them, so it's hard to do that, to get to one place or another. They might stick it in their pocket, but they do it briefly. Does it have to be on your body for a prolonged period of time to feel to have an impact? Like kind of like you're holding something hot, but you're real fast. You may not burn yourself. Is the same kind of concept with cellular, or if you're holding it, like if you put it in your pocket for a second, you have a problem?
No, I think you're right. I think the longer your exposure is, the worse it is. So it seems to be cumulative. That's one of the reasons I think it takes 10 years for the cancer to grow a large enough size for people to recognize that it's a process where it might be developing the cancer and then your body's trying to fight the cancer. So if you allow time for your body to recover by not being exposed, it simply delays any kind of harmful effect you might experience otherwise. So it's the cumulative effect that's really harmful. So keeping your cell phone in your pocket for a minute, that's not going to make much of a difference. But some people who are electrosensitive can't do that anymore. They've lost that ability. They've lost that period where their body can still compensate. Their body can't compensate, and so their body reacts in a negative fashion.
Does the larger culture, mainstream culture, make people feel like they're crazy if they feel this way? There was a TV show called Better Call Saul, in which one of the characters, I don't know, are you familiar with that show?
Oh, just briefly, yeah, I know. Yeah, he's electrosensitive.
So
Yeah.
one of the characters, who was played by Lenny from Laverne and Shirley, I forget it, I don't know his name, and he said he had issues with it, and they basically showed that it was just psychological, and but he was like putting I think tinfoil everywhere, and they made him seem like he was crazy for saying he was sensitive to electricity. Is that a common theme in culture?
It is. There are those people who mock anyone that comes up with something novel that they've never heard of before, rather than having an open mind saying, well, it could happen, why not look into it? So unfortunately, that is common. There's still a lot of medical people who don't recognize electrosensitivity. There were a group of doctors in Germany back in 2002 that sent out a petition saying, we really need to reduce our exposure because our patients are getting sick, and the techniques that we use to try to help them heal no longer work because they're going into a home that's toxic. So, you give them something that's supposed to reduce their anxiety, but then they go into an physiologically anxiety producing environment. So the pills don't work anymore. And so they were begging government agencies back in 2002 to actually have more stringent guidelines and reduce exposure. But of course, they were ignored, and there have been sort of 39 petitions so far from the scientific medical community, and they're just being ignored. No government is taking it seriously. And I think part of that is they're compromised because they're getting so much revenue from the telecom industry when they sell licenses, for example. So it's a financial benefit to the industry, and it's a financial benefit to the government in the short term. And unfortunately, those who have become sick are the ones paying the price.
Are there any countries around the world or municipalities that are doing it right?
Yeah, there's some that are doing it better than others. Russia, believe it or not, they've done research in this for a very long time. They were way ahead of Western Europe and North America on this type of research. And they're the ones who've been studying the positive effects. So they know that even very low levels of exposure can have effects, whether positive or negative. They have some of the better guidelines globally. To what degree they're enforced, I don't know. Italy has fairly good guidelines, Switzerland, China, believe it or not. So some of the countries that you might not think would care very much for the health of their population are actually doing a slightly better job than we're doing here in North America and Europe.
Can we use our devices safely? Like, is it, I mean, like right now, I assume you're in front of a computer, you're in front of something. I'm in front of a computer and a cell phone and another screen with a, with the router behind me. Is there any way to do this safely, without being bathed in all of this toxic EMFs?
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the things that I recommend. So I'm sitting in front of my computer. My computer is hardwired. It's connected, the router's connected through an Ethernet to my computer. The technology coming to my house is fiber optics. So it's fast, it's reliable, it's not radiating. I live about 20 feet from my neighbors, so I can pick up their Wi-Fi when they have it on, but it's very weak relative to what it is in their own home environment. And I'm not near any cell towers, so I don't have wireless technology active in my home. I also have a cell phone. I keep it in airplane mode almost all the time. I have trained people not to contact me on it unless it's an absolute emergency. So I use my landline as much as I possibly can. So I'm not exposed to this radiation. And even though my body reacts, you saw the blood test that I did on myself, like my body goes into Rouleau. So I know it's affecting me. I'm not sensitive enough to feel the sensations from that. So I don't get headaches and I can't tell when I'm exposed. So the only way I can tell if I'm exposed is I have to have a meter. But when I deal with people who are electrosensitive, they can go into an environment and after a few minutes, they'll say, okay, there's something on, because they're getting a symptom, they're getting a reaction. And some people can actually tell what type of cell phone, whether it's, AT&T or, TELUS or Bell or whatever, because they have an effect at different parts of their head or different parts of their body. So some are incredibly sensitive and can tell you that kind of information automatically.
All right, I'm going to throw a question out to the audience. Mary, go ahead and ask your question.
Oh,
I'm sorry, Mary?
okay. Oh shit. Hmm.
Do you want me to come back to you, Mary? Okay. All right. So I think we're gonna no, okay. You know what? We have Elaine. Go ahead and ask your question, Elaine.
Yes, thank you. I understand there are Faraday cases for cell phones. It's like a small pouch that you throw the phone in. Does that allow the phone to ring? Because some of us can't put our phones in airplane mode all day. It's just not because of the nature of our work, emergencies, family members under potential emergencies, etc. So do those Faraday cases work effectively? And can you keep the phone on your body as a result of using them?
Okay, well, there are different types of containers that you can put your phone in. Some are like you just slip it in and one side protects and the other side doesn't. So if you had it that way, then the radiation would be going away from your body. So if you had it, in a pocket and you had the protector between your cell phone and your body, then that would reduce the levels of exposure you would have. So depending on the type of Faraday cage, there's material you can get, the silver fiber material that you can put over your cell phone. It won't block it 100%, but it'll reduce the radiation. So if you can't put it into, airplane mode because you need it, keep it as far away from your body as possible and put some sort of shielding device between you and that cell phone so that it can still get the signal to ring, but you're not being exposed to that radiation. So there's ways of setting that up. And the best thing to do is to get an inexpensive meter to make sure that the type of blocking that you're using is actually working. And it's sort of worth the $200 to get that peace of mind. and information to protect your body and anyone else in your home or office as well.
Thank you for the question, Elaine. Do the Faraday cases, do they, like, if you put it right on your body, would that be safe? It doesn't go through there at all? So
It depends on the case. So, I would say
if it passes your meter test.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If it passes your meter, then the level of exposure would be much reduced. It wouldn't necessarily be zero, but it would be much reduced. However, for some reason, I just wouldn't keep it on my body. I'd put it in a purse that's farther away or something like that. And they have man purses now too that are quite fashionable. So.
All right. We have an audience member asking about Fitbits, and they have all these different wearables. What are your thoughts on the dangers?
Well, I have something called an Aura Ring, and it is absolutely amazing in the amount of information it gives you about your body, your sleep cycles, your activity level. This does not radiate at all. When I charge it, so I wear it, wake up in the morning, put it on the charger. It takes about a minute to charge. At that stage, I transfer information from this to my cell phone using Bluetooth. Takes about a minute, and then everything gets turned off again. With the Fitbits, unfortunately, they're radiating. They're putting out a pulse every few seconds. And so once again, once you become sensitive, you won't be able to use it. And the longer you have it, the more likely you will become ultimately sensitive to this radiation. So I would strongly encourage the manufacturers, just design something that you can have turned off that's still collecting information. It's still, doing everything it needs to do, but it's not irradiating your body. If they can do it with this little computer or a ring, they can certainly do it with, a Fitbit or a watch or something like that.
What is the mechanism if it's not radiating that it pulls the information out of your body?
Well, it's got various sensors on the inside of the ring. And
Okay.
so it's measuring, your temperature, it's measuring various things. I think the newest model can actually measure your blood pressure. It's measuring your heart rate. You can put your finger in a little heart monitor and it'll give you, information on your heart rate. So it's just measuring a lot of the different things. It's keeping it stored. So it's storing the information, and then it downloads it just when you have it on the charger and you're actually, turn on the Bluetooth, turn off the airplane mode on your ring so that it can actually transfer that information.
Thanks. So beyond the anecdotal evidence of cancer, what specific adverse reproductive effects in farm animals have been consistently linked to ground current pollution in your research?
I didn't talk about ground current at all. It's something very few people know about, and there's been quite a bit of research done on it for, at least about the last 50 to 80 years. And one of the things we're noticing is that with things like wind turbines and solar power, and if you happen to live near high voltage transmission lines, those lines are no longer able to carry all of the return current back to the utility. So you have to have a circuit. When you have a battery, you have a circuit. You have the positive and negative nodes on the battery have to be connected in order for the electrons to flow through and light the light bulb, kind of thing. Well, you have to have the same circuit when it comes to power lines. And so you have your source of electricity. It comes along the line, it feeds into the home, and then it comes back on a return circuit. Sometimes that return circuit doesn't have the capacity for the electrons because we're using more and more electronic devices. It's not a smooth sine wave anymore. It's really quite dirty, a lot of dirty electricity, for example. This flows not only back on the wire, but it flows back along the ground as well. And a lot of the research that's been done in this area has been done with dairy cattle. And the reason for that is that dairy cattle are milked 2 to 3 times a day, depending on the industry. And it affects milk production. So if you have current flowing through the ground, the cows won't drink as much water because they get shocked, and they won't produce as much milk. So you can tell if you've got a ground current problem within 24 hours, or if you got rid of a ground current problem within 24 hours, just based on the milk production of these dairy cows. The thing is, it affects humans as well, not just, dairy cows. And lot of couples living on farms have difficulty reproducing, just like their cows do. And they have to go through several cycles before they actually take. They have an increase in miscarriages and deformed births, that sort of thing. So what's happening to the cows is actually happening to people as well. And you can put electrodes on the feet of the cows, and you can actually measure the current flowing through their body, from their back foot all the way through to their front foot. And you can do that with people as well. So we know this is going along the body, and it's going internal as well.
Okay. And how localized is, like, when you have this ground current, how localized is it to what's going on? How if you have a problem in one area, how expansive is it essentially?
Could be kilometers. Really large areas tend to be affected. And so if you've got a distribution line problem or a transmission line problem, it's going to affect the entire area from the beginning of the line right through to the end of the line. In some places, it might be worse than others, depending on the conductivity of the soil. So if the soil is very conductive, if it's just rain, for example, it's going to flow through at a much greater rate. So it could be very large tracts of land. We've tried to get the utility to deal with this issue. They refuse to improve the situation in most cases, because they're worried that once they improve it, farmers will recognize that their reduced productivity on the farm for milk and livestock production had been affected, and they're concerned about being sued. So a lot of this is, entirely about money and lawyers getting involved and trying to protect the utility. But the problem is it's just going to get worse with ground current, especially with all of the cell towers and with the wind turbines and solar farms. They're all producing a problem, and we need to deal with it. We need to get it out of the ground. In some cases, the levels flowing through the ground are so high that they've electrocuted animals. In New York State, I don't know if you heard about this, but during the winter, when people were walking their dogs, sometimes a dog would step on a metal plate where the electricity was flowing through it, and they'd get electrocuted and they'd die. And it's worse when there's salt being placed on the sidewalks and it's wet, from melted snow and that sort of thing. And they've done studies in New York and in Ontario, and they're saying the problem's so bad that we advise that you not walk your dog at night when the street lights are on, because it's worse then, and that you use a leather chain instead of a metal chain. So if your dog gets electrocuted, you won't, that kind of thing, which is, in my mind, absolutely ludicrous. So it's a very serious problem. The sooner it's recognized by the utility and fixed, the better. But until it is, we're just going to continue suffering some of the ill effects from it, both financially and through health and our livestock, that sort of thing, and our pets.
And how do we measure the ground current if we wanted to know? Like, a lot of people want to go outside in their bare feet. They want to ground themselves to nature, and now we have to worry about getting electrocuted. How do we measure and find out if our environment's safe or how dangerous it is?
I've got a number of YouTube videos. So if you go to youtube.com/Magda Havas and put in ground current, I've got about 5 videos that are explaining how the current gets into the ground, how it moves through the ground, how you can measure it. But basically, you take 2 metal rods, connect them with a wire, and put a scope meter in the middle, and you'll be able to see the current flowing. If the potentials are different, you'll be able to see the current flowing from one to the other. And if you take those 2 stakes and move them around like in a clockwise, you can figure out the primary direction the current is flowing. So you can get quite a bit of information. And if you have an appropriate scope meter, you can measure not only the 60 cycle or the 50 cycle, depending on where you are, but you can also measure the dirty electricity. And it's the dirty electricity that's much more harmful than the 60 hertz frequencies that we're exposed to.
We got 1 minute. I'm going to try Mary. We just have to keep it brief. Mary, I'm going to give you one more shot. We just have about 30 seconds. Okay. She raised her hand again. I'm not sure why. All right. Any final words?
Oh, she just unmuted herself.
No, that was, yeah. We're all good. We're giving up on Mary for now. Any final words?
Well, I really appreciate, Michael, you giving me this opportunity. I know there are 3 other speakers talking about electromagnetic fields, 1 tomorrow and 2 next week with a panel discussion. It's something that very few people know about compared to chemical toxins, for example. And it's something that I think we should all learn more about to protect ourselves, because ubiquitous, it's everywhere. And unless we start becoming responsible for our own exposures in our own lives and our own health, we're not going to get very healthy very quickly if we follow some of the outdated government recommendations.
Thank you so much, Dr. for all the information you shared with us today. All right,
Thank you.
if we can unmute the audience, please.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Magda.
Thank you so much.
Very much.
I'm like gonna check out.
Thank you.